effective, grounded, and in your personal power? Are you likely to go toe-to-toe and escalate the situation with put-downs and barbs of your own, and you know just what to say? Are you likely to pull back, hold back, almost like you're in the corner with your tail between your legs? Or do you just start thinking, I know where he parks his Somewhere in there, the light bulb went on for where you were likely to go. That's scenario-based learning. So please pull out a piece of paper. I'm going to move you quickly through some scenarios, and this is what I need you to do. Most of you will know what the right answer is. Suspend following through with what you know the right answer is. And go a little deeper, dig a little deeper, and get at the feelings, tendencies, impulses, or behaviors that really fit where you go in an emotionally charged, provoked situation. You're facilitating a provocative class discussion about care challenges in the current healthcare environment. One of the top students is monopolizing the discussion. He interrupts other students, talks over them, dismisses their perspectives. When you confront this behavior, he begins to defend his right to participate and claims he's just passionate about the topic. What would you say or do in the moment? Jot it down. This is part of your self-assessment. You're observing behavior among a group of students that clearly does not reflect respect for cultural differences. The language and labels used about a particular group of clients or patients is not respectful, not professional. You're both angry at the behavior and concerned about how pervasive these attitudes and behaviors are. What would you say or do in the moment? Befuddled or confused, remember that fight, flight, or freeze response where you feel like you're caught in the headlights and what do I do now? That's all part of the emotional life. Next scenario. You're working with a student who's been unsuccessful in her placement. You delivered that message in a one-to-one meeting at the end of a very busy day. Immediately, the student begins to assign blame for her failure on the academic program. You and others she's encountered in her placement. What would you say or do? Scenario. Your students are working on a team assignment. When the first group presents, you see that one member of the group appears to be inconspicuous in the presentation, allowing others to speak for her. When you pose questions to her directly, she appears hesitant to speak up and looks to her colleagues for support. When you continue to press her for her own thoughts and ideas on the topic, she begins to cry. What would you say or do in the moment? You're working with a student who demonstrates solid clinical knowledge and whose academic record to date has been exceptional. In this placement, the student is demonstrating non-constructive behaviors with patients and staff in the workplace. You observe her with a child and parent who are both anxious about an upcoming treatment for the child. She dismisses their concern and starts to move forward with the intervention. What would you say or do in that moment? You're working with a student who doesn't appear to be progressing the way you expected. She continuously asks questions that she should know the answer to. She seeks supervision or support in areas where she could be practicing independently. You're feeling the burden of the overly dependent student and feel resentment at carrying the additional load. You look up from the desk to see her waiting in your doorway one more time. I just clicked past that scenario, so I hope you can remember it. And the emotional charge attached to it. Yeah. The ability to go back would be great. Sure. You can be past your If you're starting to feel a little stirred and provoked, these are provocative situations related to teaching. And when you imagine yourself in them, you're going to start to feel some of those feelings. So if you need to take a few slow, deep breaths and pour a glass of water, not surprised. Now, you're working with a bright, enthusiastic student whose energy and enthusiasm seems to be waning in the placement. You approach her to discover what's going on, and she lets you know that one of the members of the interprofessional team is treating her badly. He interrupts her team meetings, makes put-down remarks, or dismisses her questions. And she's tried to talk to him, but to no avail, and the behavior continues. What do you say? You and your colleague disagree about the readiness of one student to move forward in the program. You observe the colleague's interactions with the student, and you experience these interactions as overly friendly. You're concerned the relationship may be interfering with your colleague's objectivity. What do you say and do? Next scenario. You're teaching a class and a group of students are not only inattentive, but they're becoming disruptive to the learning experience and confront the behavior. And one of the students makes a disrespectful joke about you. Many of the students join in the laughter. What would you say or do? Okay, you're having a really stressful week. Classroom time, grading assignments, putting the final touches on a research paper you and another colleague are writing. The commitments at home haven't let up. One of your students requests a meeting with you outside the usually scheduled time, and you graciously agree to meet over your lunch break. He opens the conversation with, I feel like I need to give you feedback. Most of us are having a hard time with your lack of availability to us with this part of the program, and we think you should know we're frustrated and disappointed. We don't have this experience with other educators. What would you say or do? On the paper is important. What's also important is your internal awareness. As you move through those scenarios, what was stirred in you? What emotional reactions were there that you were aware of? What physical changes did you experience? Tightness in your jaw, sweating palms, headache, recollection of a prior experience that was very, very emotionally familiar? Or just a sense of, I don't know what to do in this moment. They happen suddenly. And there isn't much time to respond. Really important to give a sense of what your tendencies are. Close your piece of paper. We'll tuck that away for a while. Emotional intelligence development starts with self-awareness, and I'm hoping there's a kernel of awareness or insight that's emerged from those scenarios. What I'm going to do is put you into the next phase of the process. All right. When I introduced you to Roland Glazer's model of influence, the interpersonal influence style, I identified there were 4 categories of behavior. I named them as assertive, openly aggressive, passive, and concealed aggressive. Most often, we put our picture on the assertive profile and somebody else's picture on the other. What's really important is to express all aspects, the characteristics and the behaviors associated with that profile. And the more rich those profiles are, the more likely we are to see ourselves blatantly or subtly within those profiles. Because all of us have the potential and the likelihood to engage in some of those influence styles depending on the circumstance, depending on the person, and depending on our energy level. The more we know about our tendencies, our predispositions, and our default styles, the more likely we are to ready ourselves to manage in those difficult situations, or to at least course correct it and recognize our contribution to them and learn from our mistakes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass out to each of your tables a particular influence style. You're going to have about 5 or 7 minutes to develop that profile, to talk about what that looks like from your experience, to build as much recognition to the profile as possible. How would that person communicate? What words would they use? What would their facial expression be? The tone of their voice? What would their likely response be to mistakes? How would they respond to the requirement for change? What's the impact of that style on relationships, on the learning environment, and definitely on self-esteem? Yours and the other person's. So build a profile, and then we're going to hear from the groups so that we have a shared understanding, because before we move into talking about what good looks like in those scenarios, we need to be able to attach labels to the behavior that we all understand and agree with. And sometimes people blend or merge the styles. One example is, I identified that Roland Glaser says, assertive is emotionally intelligent, emotionally intelligent is effective. Have you ever heard somebody say, you know, she was just a little too assertive? Okay, substitute. Does it make sense if I said, she was just a little too emotionally intelligent? She was just a little too effective? You can't be too effective. Usually what they mean is aggressive, and assign a label from this model anyway of assertiveness, and that would be a clash with this model. So I want you to build the profiles in your small groups. What I'm going to do is hand out flip chart paper. And sometimes it's easier to get busy. And it's easier to get busy with a colored marker and a big piece of paper. What you need to do is choose a reporter and a recorder at your table who will share your ideas and thoughts. So you'll have to open up the piece of paper to find out what profile and style you have. If you need any explanation, can you let me know by show of hands if I'm turning my head away if you're not hearing me? What we're going to do in terms of the reporter at the tables reporting out is we have, I'm going to invite you when you're reporting out to just tack up your profile at one of the flip charts and they'll come to you with a microphone. So I'm sure everyone has a recorder and a recorder selected from your group. Okay, can I see a show of hands? How many tables worked on assertiveness, the assertive influence style? Okay. We're going to start there, and that will become our North Star. That's what good looks like. When we're talking about the influence style that's most likely to lead to positive outcomes, we're talking about the assertive style. So for one of the assertive influence style tables, can we get somebody jumping up to share their thinking? First one up needs to go to the mic. I see someone standing up. I see them sitting down. Can I have someone start, please? Okay.
Okay, we had assertive, and we said that assertive people admit when they are wrong, they're good listeners, high self-awareness, effective communicators, respectful, empathetic, not easily intimidated, diplomatic, they would be good as a mediator, they have good rapport with others, open to constructive criticism, proactive, and confident.
Somebody else was working on the assertive profile. Can you add to that as well?
We also said in communication that the I statements would be used a lot, and that it would be a win-win type of communication, and that we would be more like an adult and respect the people who you're communicating with. And did you want to go on with the other thing?
Sure.
Okay. We also looked at response to mistakes. Is that?
Mm-hmm.
That the person would take ownership, admit them, look at mistakes as an opportunity to learn, and appreciate the feedback that they were given. We also looked at response to change, and that the person would be open to change, They would look at it as an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to shape the change, to be a positive person towards it rather than the person dragging their feet. Also the impact on relationships, maintain a positive relationship, respectful, it builds on trust, and the impact on learning would be it would make it safe environment, it would foster learning, and your impact on self-esteem, we said that would build definitely positive self-esteem, and they would be able to come out with a sense of who they were and worth.
Thank you. Other tables that worked on assertiveness, did you have additional insights about that influence style, the behaviors associated with it? Yes.
The only other thing that was a bit different under the impact on relationships, and I think it was partly because we were getting confused at our table between someone who is labeled as over-assertive, being aggressive, and we had just said that assertive people could be possibly confused with aggressive behavior, and they may appear dominant or misunderstood over a passive person. But we're not sure. We were thinking that maybe we were confusing it ourselves with someone who's over-assertive, and maybe over-assertiveness is aggressive.
Thank you. Brilliant. It's really important to have this kind of conversation because we carry our notions and our experiences, our labels, and words are very important. In this model, assertiveness is operating from a place of, I'm okay. And because I'm okay, you can be okay too. It's an uplifting kind of experience. I can communicate really tough and difficult messages. It can be about things that I want to change with you or around you. But I deliver it in a way that's respectful with consideration for your feelings. It may not feel good to you. So sometimes when we deliver messages, it provokes an emotional response in someone else, but the way, the how of it is still respectful and demonstrating consideration. You can never be too assertive. Because assertiveness is openness and directness and consideration. You can never be too open, and you can never be too considerate. So this is the model that we're operating with. And it may shake some of your assumptions around those labels, but the reason why it's important to have a shared experience around this is because when we're giving people performance feedback or behavioral feedback or encouraging new behaviors, we need to name the behaviors. And this is a model that's really reflective and congruent with emotional intelligence. Any other ideas about assertiveness or confusing pieces related to the description of the document?
Well, I just wondered if you were someone who fell into the passive. Sorry, if you were someone who fell into the passive square, looking at someone who was assertive and effective. I was thinking that you, depending on your degree of passivity and your low self-esteem, you might perceive that person as aggressive. But then the more I think about that, the more I think that if the person was indeed perfect, like me, for instance. But they would be the implicit respect that they show to others should temper that, so that even if I'm awestruck by your assertiveness from my position of being quite passive, I probably would be, I might be slightly intimidated by that, I guess. But it's not necessarily as negative as I would be intimidated by somebody who was aggressive.
Right. And we don't have any control over how other people...
I wonder if that's where some people get the notion, and many of us, of being overly assertive. But.
Right. If I'm uncomfortable, if you put me outside of my comfort zone and there's something emotionally familiar about that, and we're dragging our past history and our supplements into that situation, the emotional reality for an individual may not reflect the emotional reality of the other person. So all we have any control over at any given moment is how we bring ourselves to that situation. What I would suggest is that if somebody's operating from an assertive influence style and is considerate of your thoughts and your feelings and your needs, that you'll feel that connection because there's an attunement there. You might be uncomfortable with what they're saying. You might be really pushed outside of your comfort zone. And the connection that's there will still have that level of attunement that's there. Again, you can be assertive in a number of ways. You can be assertive in a very outgoing way or a very quiet way. You can be assertive in a serious way or a humorous way. But what it requires is the openness and directness of your messaging and your consideration for other people. This is the ideal. So you said perfect. I'm going to say this is the ideal and preferred style of operating from. Our goal, if our goal is to be emotionally intelligent, if our goal is to be optimally effective at any given moment, is to get there and stay there more often. Nobody can get there and stay there all the time. So it really is around increasing that frequency of operating from that style and the time that we're able to be there, even in the difficult moments. Is there ever a time that assertiveness is not the preferred style? Think about the situations you find yourself in. Is there ever a time that some other style is just about that in terms of outcomes?
Well, if the situation required, like it was a safety situation where you had to act aggressively immediately.
Right. We often get that, especially from healthcare providers. Now put yourself in that emergency crisis situation. Someone's down on the ground, the team comes, somebody has to take charge, be directive, demonstrate leadership, and get the job done. What's the difference between somebody taking charge from an assertive influence style and an openly aggressive influence style? What are the differences? Yes?
It comes under the consideration for others, and while in an ideal situation you want to have consideration for others, in an emergency like the death situation, consideration from others may be secondary to the emergency actions needed.
And it may be. So you may be clear and direct and prescriptive. You may provide commands or orders. The differentiator would be, after that situation, someone who's operated from an assertive place, even if they slipped into aggressive, would probably check back in. But think about those emergency situations and think about that open loop system where emotions are contagious. Think about yourself in an experience where you were taking direction from someone who was calm, centered, grounded, clear, and in control. Confident in their own abilities and able to delegate to you because they were confident in your abilities. Think about the time when somebody might have been giving you directions and commands and they were emotionally hijacked, they weren't mentally clear, their directions were loud, orders, you became confused. Have you had those different situations? I always think about what happens when somebody who's in charge is calm, centered, and clear, versus someone who's feeling out of control, anxious, demanding, bullying, intimidating. Who do you want operating on you? It's quite possible to take charge, be clear, demonstrate leadership, direct, firm, and do it in a way that drives the emotional energy, creates an emotional climate in a way that's positive and constructive. I would suggest sometimes we think that directness and a commanding prescriptive style that's appropriate for emergency situations isn't assertiveness. It is in that situation. Sometimes we think assertiveness is about, okay, somebody has to do CPR, we better build consensus about what the right time is and when we should and when we should take turns or shift. It's not about hugging and it's not about consensus building. It's about effective action. Sometimes effective action is clarity, directness, and a command orientation. But it's done from a calm, centered, confident place, not an out of control, emotionally hijacked place. Okay. 5 minutes. We're going to pick this up after break. I want to still continue to differentiate between assertiveness and other styles. Assertiveness can be really, really, really quiet as well. So, how many of you who did passive, can I just see a show of hands, struggled with quietness or the characteristics of not speaking up, being passive? Okay. Those are some of the paradigms that get in the way of our understanding, uncovering, and discovering our own kind of tendencies. So we need to pick this up in a couple of minutes. But have we got all of the ideas around assertiveness out there? Has everybody had a chance to share their perspective of what assertiveness is? And after break, we'll talk about what it's not. Is there anybody who wouldn't want to get there and be there more often? That's the pursuit of emotional intelligence. What I'm going to ask you to do is to break now, and if you can tell us when we need to come back.
Okay, we have a break. The washrooms are out to the left or down to the right and right again. There's a beautiful atrium there if you'd like to have your coffee there, and they're bringing out this break goodies now, and we have until 11 o'clock. So it's a nice situation. Okay, so back to Lianne.
I love the energy of the room. Thank you to all of the people who built an assertive profile and helped us to differentiate between that emotionally intelligent behavior we all aspire to and sometimes the other behaviors that we default to. So this is the part of the program when we talk about those default styles. So we're effective, we're effective, we're effective, we're assertive, we're assertive, we're assertive. We bump into something, we're emotionally charged, we're stressed or overwhelmed, and we default to one of those patterns of behavior that may have served us a long time ago, but definitely no longer. Sometimes it's easier to take it away to the personal part to build a profile. So who in the room worked on the openly aggressive style? Here, only and here. Okay, so who'd like to tell us about that style? Remember, don't put anybody else's face on it.
We didn't have any trouble coming up with these at this table, which is interesting. We've all encountered this type of personalities. We said that someone who's openly aggressive, their communication is loud, dominant, they interrupt other people, we dubbed them steamrollers, and they dismiss other people's opinions. They respond to mistakes by deflecting that responsibility, by blaming other people and being punitive, perhaps to that extreme. The response to change is rigid and immobile. Again, they're steamrolling, and we quoted that as my way or the highway. And they take credit even if it's not their idea. Their impact on relationships is they're dominant, they don't respect other people, controlling again, power, unhealthy, actually, better than everybody else and disregarding other people. They shut down the learning environment from our perspective and really decrease people's participation. And depending on the rest of the group, the person may in fact be excluded themselves. And they really impose on others, I suppose, learned helplessness in shutting other people down. Not that we know any of these people.
Not that we ever know that. Okay, the other group that was working with openly aggressive, do you have anything else to add or share?
Under communication, we had that they're often very opinionated, dismissive of others, can be very threatening, and very inflexible in their thinking. With respect to mistakes, we had often present as being very defensive and intolerant, or very demeaning and disrespectful of others. Change, not being very open to other viewpoints. And with relationships, we had, the only other difference point we had is making, it can actually make others feel more passive if we're kind of feeling threatened. Learning, we also said shuts down the learning experience and can make it really difficult for growth or change. And with respect to self-esteem, it can be very diminishing of self-esteem for others that are involved with those individuals. And we also kind of highlighted how their own self-esteem, there might be some lack of confidence that they might be kind of trying to kind of cover up also.
That's it. That notion around self-esteem, the bravado that's associated with that style of where my needs and my rights are more important than yours, it's really recognizable, open, clear, direct, and in your face like a smoking gun. Everybody can recognize it. What's significant is that with that direction, there is no consideration for other people. In order for me to feel okay, I have to bring you down. And again, the behaviors I designed to dominate and put down, etc. And interestingly enough, some of the behaviors associated with aggressiveness are open. But there are some subtle differences, and I think it was really interesting when you talked about the remedial placement. What you put me in touch with was my own tendency to aggressiveness when I moved into that self-righteous and superior position and think, I bother to do that kind of coaching with that person who really doesn't deserve it. That remedial coaching piece. Anytime you move into a place of criticism or judgment, you've moved to the aggressive ground. So thank you for that comment, because it was like that was my ouch moment. Any other aspects of behavior or qualities or characteristics associated with that style of influence? Okay, we've got a clear sense of difference between aggressive and assertive. Okay, let's talk about passive. Who's about passive? Hi, can we hear from you? And then over here.
Okay, for communication, passive was, they tend to communicate in a minimal way, agree a lot, kind of sit back, the body language is kind of like, don't notice me. And a lot of indirect communication, like tell somebody else to tell that person. For the response to mistakes, hiding, apologetic, will admit it, may not want to take anything else on because, oh, I made a mistake. For response to change, accepting, non-challenging, but it may internalize resentment about the change, just doesn't express it. For the impact on relationships, frustrating for others because they don't communicate, they won't express their own opinions, so that makes it difficult and induces resentment from others because they're not participating in the relationship. For the impact on the learning environment, if it's a supervisor, they're not very directive for the student. They don't really give a lot of guidance. And if it's a student, they don't show much initiative. For the self-esteem, generally there's very low self-esteem in a passive person.
Thank you. Over here. Just add the pieces that are different.
2 points that we had different with regards to response to mistakes. We had, they often will try to accept all the blame and maybe fix all the problems instead of accepting really just the part that they're really accountable for. And then it can lead to problems kind of delegating if they're in a leadership position. And with respect to response to change, we said they may kind of accept it externally and nod, but internally they're more resistive to that change. Those are really the 2 differences.
Thank you. Good additions. Additional insights, ideas, or concepts related to passive? I'd like to add some. Okay. How many of you? Oh, we've got some over here. Sorry.
Yeah,
I can't even see that.
Just a couple insights here in terms of affect. They might be anxious. When the decision's being made and they just can't get their feelings out, they might feel anxious about it. And there may not be as much eye contact if it's a one-to-one relationship. So that's the other differences that we have.
Good additions. Again, what's underlying the behavior? Do you see the behavior? What's underlying it? In terms of anxiousness, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to stand out. I don't want to cause trouble. I don't want to stir things up. There could be a number of emotional drivers to the behavior. And again, a lot of times people think about the passive style as the pull back, not say anything, not engage, the withdrawn piece. And it's important that you recognize passive in yourself. So, you're hardworking people. How many of you, as this table described, when something goes wrong, tend to assume responsibility for everything and need to caretake and make it right and fix it? You're not just fixing the part you're responsible for, but you're extending yourself and making sure everything is okay for everybody. Ever have those kind of tendencies? How many people are people pleasers? How many people are perfectionists? Oh, it's okay if Charlene only gets 99 out of 100, but oh my God, where did that other mark go? And it's not good enough. I'm not good enough. Perfectionism, workaholism, taking on more than anybody else should or would. Okay. Conflicts, it emerges. You minimize it, you speed past it, you smooth over it, rather than surface it and deal with it directly. You just hope it goes away. You're okay. Your needs are important. Mine are down here. I may have something to say, but I say it indirectly. Another place that it shows up be this. Have you ever had a situation, and it might have been similar to the scenarios we had earlier, where you managed it really well in the moment? That night when you were folding laundry or mowing the lawn, you started to ruminate and think, oh, I wonder if they're upset with me. I wish I had that to do over. I wonder what they think about me. I could have done that better. That's not a learning orientation. That's rumination. Reflection that leads to learning is, aha, I know what I could do differently, versus beating yourself up. When you move into the ruminating, beating yourself up, all those patterns of perfectionism, you shift to passive. It's an effective influence. Now, you're sitting in a meeting, and you're in this assertive place. You're quietly sitting there, you don't say anything at all. The person beside you is sitting there, not saying anything, but they're operating from a passive style of influence. What's the difference? Neither one of you are saying anything. It's a pretty tumultuous conversation. How would you know the difference? Subtle but real. So you're sitting there, you're open, you're listening, you're participating in that quiet way. What else might be different?
Self-determination. So one is making a decision to quietly listen, and the other one is wanting to say something but withdrawing and not able to.
So operating from a place of confidence and choice versus fear. It's an invisible difference, but very, very significant. The only person who would know about it is you. Again, and that's where we're going to. What's driving my behavior? Okay, what's showing up here? What's the origin and the source of that? All right, let's talk about the most challenging one to recognize in ourselves. I mean, we recognize it in other people, but not in ourselves, which is the concealed aggressive or passive aggressive. Who dealt with that in this room?
Can I just ask you a
Oh,
question
sure.
on the last point?
I just want to ask a question on the last point. Is there any, way that you can influence passive behavior? Okay, there's lots of discussion within your own office. You got a pretty good team. But when you go in a high-powered meeting with the bosses, and so you know what your other colleagues, you kind of think, okay, we're all kind of the same on this issue. No one speaks up in a high-powered meeting. Everyone's passive. And you think, is there any way you can influence that rather than speaking up yourself? Rather than always being the one that speaks up on an issue and then sort of making yourself a target?
Well, again, what you have the most accountability and opportunity for change within is your own self, but certainly giving people performance feedback about how you're experiencing them. Sometimes the wake-up call doesn't come from self-assessment or 360-degree feedback or scenarios. It comes from a peer who has the courage to speak up and say, what I'm experiencing is this. Now that's the wake-up call, but that is still the journey of cultivating the assertive influence style and overcoming our emotional triggers, and our patterns of behavior, and we all have those patterns of thought and habit that show up in difficult moments. And what's more difficult than those situations when we're dealing with people in positions of authority? We all have emotional memories about dealing with people who have power and control over us and what it takes to survive in those tough situations. The problem is we apply those rules and the conditioning when we were 7 years old to the point in time when we were professional. And unless you're willing to take a look at that, examine it, determine that the cost of doing it that way costs you personally, professionally, and you have the courage to step outside of the awareness to actual action, then things go on as they were before. And if you have the opportunity to encourage and influence people in a positive way and become part of that learning partnership, and we do work with teams whose tendency is passive. And they make a commitment and intention around what does assertive look like in these situations, and they hold each other's feet to the fire and give each other feedback. So rather than going to you, who would be able to rationally lie to me about how, of course I had to do that, there was no other choice, you would shift it to a position of telling me your truth and giving me candid feedback that would allow me to know how I was doing, whether I was on track or off track. Good question. Okay, can you move to the passive aggressive? All right. Go ahead.
Hi, this was a little bit tough, but we kind of thought it was maybe the passive-aggressive mode because it's between the passive-aggressive. So we said it may result from being, you may be just too tired to fight with the person, so you just assume a do-it-yourself kind of mentality. You may be not saying anything, but you're still feeling angry inside, and you're perhaps unaware of that's how you're feeling. You may be quiet, but you will act in a way that still shows your displeasure. May result in exclusion of others. And the person on the other end, so for example, maybe the students, they might feel confused because your words may not match your actions or your body language. And so that can lead to frustration on their part because they can't really read you right, and you're saying one thing and you're doing something completely different. You may be perceived as being disingenuous or being dishonest. And it might undercut the other person because you're still acting in a way that might undercut them, even though you're being all nice on the surface. And you as a person may come across as someone who can't be trusted, can't be part of the team because you're acting in a disingenuous way. You're not really open to communication, but you appear to be, but you're not really. And it's difficult to build an honest relationship with that person. And that person's perhaps unaware that they are this way, or they think they're positive because they're passive in what they say, or they're positive in what they say, but they don't feel they're being confrontational, and yet their actions sometimes still end up being that way. And then this would lead to building positive self-esteem on your part or on the part of the person who's interacting with you.
Thank you. Additional insights and awarenesses around this influence style. Who'd like to go next?
We felt that this personality would also talk about others behind their back, or go along and maybe have grudging acceptance in a meeting and not speak up, but then outside the meeting, sort of with everybody undermining the decision that was reached by the group after it was made. Of course, we don't know anyone like this. Yeah. Also, sarcasm we thought was characteristic, and just some backstabbing. Responses to mistakes, not admitting them or being very reactive, blaming others, lacking insight, or taking no ownership for mistakes. Response to change being sabotage, underhandedness, and again, reactive. Impact on relationships is somewhat poisonous, can ruin group cohesion, and negative in general, not a positive attribute. In the learning environment, it's not conducive to learning, and they don't care about, this person wouldn't care about student feedback, and again, just undermines the environment.
Undermining word, very powerful. Anyone that had something different to add or something to challenge related to this profile? Groups? Thank you. Here and then.
You said that in their communication, they might
couch comments and generalities. Everyone says, rather than owning their own opinion. We thought that in response to mistakes, they would justify, rationalize, or minimize their own, but the mistake of anyone else would lead to gleeful chatter. We also thought that in terms of relationships, this is the person who seeks a clique. They want somebody else to share their negative opinion, sort of thing. We thought that if the preceptor had this behavior, the student would find the learning situation very uncomfortable and it might lead to fear and uncertainty in the student. And in terms of self-esteem, we thought that the individual who behaves like this inwardly may have quite a shaky self-esteem, but may gloss that over and portray themselves to others, try to appear confident or professional. And that the impact on the self-esteem of others would be to diminish their self-esteem and maybe make them question themselves.
Thank you. Great addition. Was there another group that wanted to share their insights?
We have one back here.
It wasn't actually our group, it was just out of my own personal experience. This isn't working now, so I'll just really talk really loud. But this was it was actually an employer who basically when something happened or something went wrong, wouldn't actually deal with the situation. They would just get silent and basically take on that passive behavior of, I have to do everything, and they wouldn't deal with the issue, period. It was never discussed, it was never talked about, it was just like a cloud hanging over the work environment.
Which is really undermining, which really erodes trust and confidence, and it's a very toxic experience. The words around undermining and trust and erosion of confidence associated with the style are very, very real. And it usually contributes to the least level of job satisfaction and team cohesion. It's very damaging style. At least with aggressive, you know what to do with when it's open and out there.
Yeah, we just had that one point too where your body language often exists or your undertone of your message is different than the words, so you always second guessing like, sure, fine, go ahead. Well, does that mean you want me to go ahead? Or does that mean if I go ahead and screw up that you're going to say, well, I tried, but you went ahead, but yet the words say, go ahead. And so there's often that sort of mixed message leaving you watching your back all the time, wondering if you're actually going to make a mistake or if you should actually just follow the words and engage with the word.
Think of the emotional labor that's required. We have to listen with that third ear to what's underlying the words and make sure everything's congruent. And think of what it means when we have to watch your back. Okay, it is the gossip, it is the sarcasm, it is the put down, it's the little jokes, and when you comment on it, they say, oh, just kidding. Well, no, they aren't. All right, can you recognize it in yourself? How many of you have ever given someone the silent treatment? I'm mad. You're going to know I'm mad. I'm not going to tell you why I'm mad. You're going to have to figure it out. How indirect is that? I'm feeling hopeless and helpless here, and I'm going to even the playing field and bring you down with me. Again, very, very destructive to relationships. Again, non-assertive behaviors fall into the ineffective category. A lot of the times we'll defend our behavior, we'll reshape it and reframe it to kind of show it up as assertive or the effective behavior. The key to cultivating a higher level of emotional intelligence, getting past your blind spot and defensiveness, is to take a look at what your tendencies and impulses are when you're not at your best. When you're not sitting in a calm environment, well-nourished and rested, in a conference center, but when you're in the heat of the situation when the pressures are ramped up. The scenarios we did earlier were designed to generate some of those awarenesses. Do people have a sense now of how to differentiate between assertive, openly aggressive, passive, and concealed aggressive? You feel that within Roland Glazier's models, you have a sense of what it looks like, feels like, if it was in you or within other people behaviorally, because these are behaviors. Okay. folded over piece of paper. What I would like you to do is to go back into those scenarios. The one, does everyone have one? I tried to put one on each table, but I may have made a mistake. Okay. Choose a recorder and a reporter. As you review the scenario, this time I want you to do it thinking, what was an openly aggressive response? Just passively. What's concealed aggressive or passive aggressive look like? What does assertive look like? You've got your own little piece of paper that indicated your tendency in that situation, so you can do some self-assessment as you're engaged in the conversation. But as a